You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. It's good to be back after our week off, and we're making it in just at the end of April to celebrate April as Poetry Month. You might remember that we do this every year. This one is no exception. One of my guests is a scholar who has unearthed the women who made possible the central magazine for poetry in this country, Poetry Magazine, the role that women played in that. And also, one of our guests is a distinguished American poet whose work has as one of its themes immigrants and immigration, very timely. And lots of other things to get to, so we better dive right in by going inside the headlines. Oh, let's start with Bill O'Reilly. Despite Donald Trump's public support and the loyalty of his viewers, this sexual predator was finally fired from Fox News. Consumer pressure, that is, feared by advertisers, brought him down. His ratings stayed high, but the advertisers fled in droves, so the Murdochs pulled the plug. Thanks to the gutsy women who came forward and to fine investigative journalism by the New York Times about the predation itself, hush money, cover-ups, and corruption. But keep a sharp eye out. The Fox News culture, established by Roger Ailes, also forced out last year, also for sexual harassment, that culture still reeks with sexism and racism, too. There's a class action on racism. Outstanding. O'Reilly made off with millions and established a podcast, while Fox News replaced him with right-wing misogynist Tucker Carlson, who pronounced Hillary castrating, said Democrats had invented the concept of sexual harassment, and claimed women who made money were a source of disharmony in the home. Let's get the Trump clan news out of the way, since we're already saturated with first 100 days analyses. Ivanka's brands have been granted major commercial access to China in a blatant conflict of interest. But here, at home, given the consumer backlash against her brands, her clothing is being secretly relabeled and remarketed in Steinmart stores. That's a Florida-based chain with 290 shops in 31 states, from Little Rock, Arkansas, to Madison, Wisconsin. So alert grabyourwallet.org, sisters. The new label, the secret relabeling, is as Adrienne Vittadini Studio. That's Adrienne, Adrienne, Vittadini, Vittadini. So it's relabeled Adrienne Vittadini Studio and remarketed in Steinmart stores. You know that Ivanka was booed during a German event for trying in her alarmingly robotic voice to defend her father's ostensible support for women. You might not know that an hour later she gave an exclusive interview to Breitbart News, which has run such headlines as, "Would you rather your daughter have feminism or cancer?" At least Breitbart has been denied permanent press credentials to Congress, though not to the White House. Trump might hype his so-called accomplishments, but even his base is now getting anxious about losing both health care and their wall. He now holds the record, the least popular president at the 100-day mark ever. He's floated his repeal and replace law, which would undo Obamacare, throw everything back to state-level control, erase pre-existing condition coverage, and especially target women, with higher rates for female-only procedures and with more limitations. Oh, and by the way, Congress will exempt its own coverage from these new changes. And Trump's tax reform, so-called plan, benefits, him. Nobody else, unless they're as rich as him or richer. But hallelujah for the courts. U.S. District Court Judge William Orrick in San Francisco ruled this past week that Trump cannot withhold funding to sanctuary cities. And Jeff Sessions, a bit player from Gone with the Wind, who's now Attorney General, got burned by denouncing federal judge Derek Watson, who had ruled earlier against the travel ban as, quote, some judge sitting out there on an island in the Pacific, close quote. That's Hawaii, Jeff. That's our 50th state. But what they lose in the courts, they win by stealth. The regime has begun to reimpose entry restrictions quietly for foreign workers, including those with H-1B visas that greatly upsets technology companies. They've empowered immigration and customs enforcement officers to arrest 21,362 undocumented immigrants across the nation between the time of Trump's inauguration and mid-March. That's a 32.6% increase from the previous year, and that's only in a few months. And more than a quarter of those arrested had no criminal record whatsoever. Thanks to Trump and to Mitch McConnell, Neil Gorsuch made his first Supreme Court ruling, a tie-breaking decision to kill human beings. He joined the other 4 conservative justices in denying a request from Arkansas death row inmates facing execution, asking for a stay on grounds that the lethal drugs were almost or already past their use date, and that they may have been obtained illegally. No stay. Murder, he wrote. An ongoing Reuters investigation has found another 449 areas in cities around the U.S. with lead exposure rates double those found in Flint, Michigan, but pending federal budget cuts will imperil efforts to eradicate the toxic metals. Foreign affairs. Well, Trump has authorized what he calls his military to make its own decisions about our foreign policy. So the generals, supposedly the grown-ups in the room, confirmed his threat that our powerful armada was heading toward North Korea, when actually the ships, who are not capable of intercepting ballistic missiles or missiles of any sort, when the ships were steaming in the opposite direction anyway, and those grown-ups dropped the so-called mother of all bombs on Afghanistan without consulting Trump, Congress, the Defense or State Departments, or even Jared Kushner. And now North Korea is speeding up its nuclear program. Trump called to congratulate Turkish dictator Recep Erdogan on being fake re-elected for decades to come, while a Turkish historian based at Clark University in Massachusetts finally found the aha documents that confirmed the Turkish genocide of Armenians in the early 20th century. But hey, Trump has a hotel in Istanbul. What else happened while I was gone for a week? Oh, climate change has reversed the flow of water melting from a glacier in Canada's Yukon. It happened at the Kashkawalsh Glacier with a suddenness that stunned scientists. A process that ordinarily would take thousands of years happened in just a few months. Some good stuff did happen. The gender gap was narrowed by writing 6,500 more women into art history, thanks to the 4th annual Art and Feminism Wikipedia Edit-a-thon. And those splendid scientists and science supporters took to the streets in the thousands, in Washington, across this country, with support demonstrations around the world, all protesting assaults on science, knowledge, and facts by those who foster ignorance as their best strategy to control populations. The scientists had some of the grandest signs and banners and chants since the Women's March, including the following: "If you like beer, thank yeast and scientists. I'd rather be doing clinical trials and saving lives. In peer review we trust. Science is not an opinion. Give bees a chance." And my favorite, pie in your eye. We have to take a short break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, but when I return, we're going to be talking with a scholar who has unearthed the women who really could be said to have created contemporary American poetry in the terms of its being an expansive and inclusive, vibrant, lively, including everybody voice. That's coming right up.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back. As I said at the beginning of the program, this is Poetry Month. Central to American poetry is one magazine, Poetry Magazine. It was originally called Poetry Chicago because that's where it was founded and where it still is based. It was founded in around 1910, 1911 by a 50-year-old woman who wrote some poetry and who loved poetry. It is still going 100 years later, most celebrated as it should be. It is for poets the place to publish. The first time I was published in Poetry Magazine, I was certain I'd died and gone to heaven. And in fact, I'm delighted that I have a poem coming out in a future issue, a poem from Dark Matter, from the new book of poems of mine. And it means something very special to poets because of the great poets, and the finds who are lesser known, who have published in it over that extraordinary 100 years. I knew about Harriet Monroe having founded it, but what I did not know was that women have had a unique role in nurturing it along and editing it down through all those decades. But a piece was published recently on the website, poetryfoundation.org, by Liesl Olson, who is the director of a new program in Chicago, Studies at the Newberry Library. And her most recent book is Chicago Renaissance, Literature and Art in the Midwest Metropolis. And she wrote a piece about those women, which blew me away. I should say also that there's an app for that. If you go to poetryfoundation.org, you can find out more about downloading this app. And you can have it on your smartphone, or you can go there and spin subject matters and get a poem that you hadn't expected. You can search by subject matter or by author. You can list your favorites. It is the go-to source for poetry. So that's poetryfoundation.org. And here is Liesl Olson. Liesl, it's good to have you here.
Great to be here.
Well, this piece that you wrote for Poetry Foundation, for Poetry Magazine, that people can still find on the website, poetryfoundation.org, under features, is such an interesting and important piece. Of course, I knew about Harriet Monroe, who had founded poetry, and of course I knew that poetry, originally called Poetry Chicago, but now just Poetry, is the magazine for American poetry. But other than Harriet Monroe, I had not known about all these other women, so it was so exciting to me. Tell us.
Yeah, so she was a Chicagoan, and she made her early mark by herself in her early 30s writing a poem that opened up the inaugural ceremonies for the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. It was kind of a high moment for her. It was called the Columbian Ode. And really from that moment on, she wanted to make poetry more visible in public culture in Chicago so that it would be on par with other art forms, the symphony or the Art Institute. But it wasn't until her early 50s where when she launched this magazine. And, in order to do that, she went around and talked to lots of people in Chicago and had them commit to supporting the magazine for the first 5 years by giving her $50 for 5 years. A lot of the people she talked to were the people she dubbed as big men. But then, interestingly enough, who she surrounded herself with were, women like herself, who were really committed to the art, who had a very strong editorial eye, who had an interest in free verse, which was pretty radical at the time, who were poets themselves.
And who had this idea of expanding the audience and being more inclusive. They had this idea that poetry was this living art that everybody, if it wasn't mystified away from them and made elite, everybody would gain from, as opposed, not surprisingly, to Ezra Pound, who hated that idea. He wanted it to be elite.
Right. That's right. So she used an epigraph from Walt Whitman, which the magazine still uses today, to have great poets. There must be great audiences too. Right. And Ezra Pound replied back to her, damn the audience. They eat us. Yes. And this was, she was back and forth with them, constantly arguing about the larger aim of the magazine. In a time when there were lots of other little periodicals, little magazines of modernism that were really aiming more for a kind of coterie audience, she had this idea that she wanted to lift up, the audience and kind of meet them in this place where they would be exposed to the modernist avant-garde and there would be a kind of larger conversation about the role of poetry in civic life.
Right. And the poets they introduced, under her and the women immediately following her, are just stunning. Now they are among the pantheon of great American poets: Wallace Stevens, Carl Sandburg, Edgar Lee Masters, Sherwood Anderson. It just goes on and on.
Marianne Moore, H.D., and then she's publishing a lot of people who, we don't read anymore. So it's this great kind of medley of voices, always, every month.
And she met, in her early years, she printed 64 men and 41 women from 1919 to 1920. Right. And she was that surprised her.
And people thought, she only publishes women. That was the perception in those early years. Even though poetry was a periodical, right? Even though she published 40%,
right? But then after that point, she
realized, actually, I'm not even publishing, half and half. But that was only after she'd been criticized that she did that tally to figure out, okay, what are my numbers? But I think, in those early years, it was, people who knew the magazine knew that there were quite a number of women at the editorial helm.
Also, in their early issues, poetry focused on Native American and New Mexican cultures, which was unheard of. It was all East Coast white pale males, as I call them.
Right. So Monroe had this idea that the American lyric, the voices of American poetry, should be cultivated from the West. And at that point, when she launched her magazine, 1912, Chicago was still kind of that gateway to the West. Right. And she wanted to not always turn to European models or to cultural institutions and voices from the East Coast, but really look westward. And one of her assistant editors, Alice Corbin Henderson, really interesting woman, she suffered from tuberculosis, and so she went out, lived in Santa Fe and in Taos, and she was affiliated with the whole group of artists and writers around this arts patron, Mabel Dodge Luhan. And she was really the kind of conduit for Monroe, who sent Monroe work from poets and artists from the Southwest, what we call the Southwest today. And there were issues that were devoted to folk songs from the American West, and frankly, a kind of interpretation of Native American poetry through a very Anglo-American eye, but nonetheless an engagement with those cultural complexities that you didn't necessarily see a whole lot elsewhere.
And then you wrote also that working closely with Henderson and, of course, with Harriet Monroe in the early years was Eunice Teachin. I'm not sure how she's pronounced.
Eunice Teachin. Really interesting woman as well. Her papers are actually here at the Newberry Library where I work. She traveled. She was a world traveler, much like Monroe, spent a lot of time out west, but also traveled to the Far East, China and Japan. She also served in the First World War as a correspondent, a generation younger than Monroe, and worked at Poetry Magazine, and really saw Monroe as a kind of almost mentor and mother figure. She herself was a poet. She published a few volumes of poetry and was connected to the art scene more broadly.
Marion Strobel, you write about, who was a poet and who established the Harriet Monroe Prize for Poetry.
That's right.
With the inheritance from her father's engineering company. So they each in their own way. And Strobel, who had this whole liaison with William Carlos Williams.
Right. Yeah.
You know, I mean, but interestingly enough, she like all the rest, wanted to expand the audience, not contract
the
it.
audience.
You know, yeah.
That's right.
I hadn't known about Margaret Danner, who was particularly notable because she was African American and deepened the magazine's representation of African American poets. So the more voices are represented in those pages, the more people are drawn to it. And the women had that expansive vision. I remember just recently, not recently, but in the past maybe 20 years, reading a quote of Robert Lowell's in answer to somebody saying, not enough people are reading poetry these days, or, you know, loving it or understand the joy of it. And his response was, too damn many people are reading poetry these days.
That's right.
You know, and I thought, my God, what is this possessive pale male ownership of what began as a bardic art around the campfire where people...
Well, that's right.
You know,
I mean, it's almost as if when the ideological lines are hard and fast, when kind of less and less is at stake. It's you know, this idea that you have to read poetry a certain way or that it needs to be a certain way. It's it's a problem, and I think one of the things that's really distinctive about Monroe, and which she's been criticized for and also celebrated for, is what she called her open door policy, which she put forth in the second issue of the magazine, in which she essentially says, this magazine is not committed to any ideological lines or, set of political beliefs or commitments to certain aesthetic forms. We're gonna take it all.
Right.
Now, she was obviously a proponent of free verse, but that said, she's publishing plenty of metrical verse and to some extent fairly conventional verse in her magazine. One of the most famous poems that the magazine publishes in its early years is a poem by Joyce Kilmer, and I'm going to mess up the lines, but I think I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree. Right. That's the opening couplet, if I'm getting it right.
Yes, I think so.
So, it's a real range of things, but I would say that open door policy, in some ways, is a mark of her openness to what came and went through Chicago. I mean, if you think about Chicago during this period as really a kind of crossroads city, or think through the fact of it having the most lines of track coming in and out of it than in any other American city, that fact is also kind of metaphor for the people, the ideas that came through Chicago, and she's a real embodiment of that.
She gave us a magazine that lasted a century so far, and will continue, keep on keeping on. And in the middle of major men, she managed to use Wallace Stevens' phrase. She managed to put women and women's attitudes of inclusivity right in the center of the poetry world, and thus transform it. It's a terrific piece. Right. It's called 100 Years of Poetry, meaning the magazine, and the women who edited and defined Poetry magazine. You can find it on the Poetry Foundation website, poetryfoundation.org, and we've been speaking with the author of that piece, Liesl Olson. Thank you, Liesl, for being with us and for writing this great piece.
Thanks so much. It was fun.
And now it's time, are you ready? For the Surrealism Corner. I'm going to start with an item that's only a single sentence, since it really does speak for itself. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has been voted onto membership in the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. Period. Yep. Now, in Transylvania, yes, my pretty, this is the real place in central Romania. There's a spring tradition stubbornly preserved through monarchical systems, communist systems, and pretend democracies. Men douse young women with buckets of ice water and then give them a flower, and then the women feed the men snacks and pastries. Now, in different forms, this rite also persists in villages throughout Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, and Ukraine. In some areas, the men hit the women in so-called playful strokes with willow branches. Men and boys have been seen using water bombs and pistols, and firefighters have even been seen using fire hoses. There are staunch local women who have criticized this tradition as ridiculous and sexist, and others have noted that the rite clearly dates from a time when baths were a once-a-month luxury, especially since in some areas these days the ice water and flowers have given way to bottles of perfume or even spray deodorant. Still, the custom is fervently defended by the men and some women in one Romanian village as providing, quote, a sense of identity, close quote. I would tell you the name of the village if I could pronounce it, but it has 3 vowels and 14 consonants, so I'm not going to attempt that. In the largest study yet on sex differences in the physical makeup of the human brain, University of Edinburgh researchers have found that women and men do actually have different brain structures and sizes. Both Reuters News Service and Quartz.com reported that women tend to have thicker cortices, which are associated with intelligence, although men's brains tend to be larger overall. This research could shed light on why certain medications work better, gender-specifically. The findings aren't totally new, but previous neuroscience studies of this sort looked only at a sample size of a few hundred participants, whereas here researchers examined the brains of over 5,200 participants older than age 40, half female and half male. The group itself was part of a larger UK biobank study that's in the midst of collecting health data on over 500,000 people. The MRI imaging and analyses found that women's brains, though smaller overall than men's, had larger subregions of the cortex, such subregions being separate parts associated with memory, sensory input, learning, and making choices. Furthermore, there was much variation in sizes of different brain regions in males, whereas women's brains tended to be more similar to each other. Well, we knew that. The research hasn't yet been peer-reviewed, but was published in BioAR 14 this last April. Finally, an absolute must for the Surrealism Corner. The Gorilla Girls, and if you don't know who they are, run, do not walk to your nearest search engine. The Gorilla Girls have come out with a new coffee table or bathroom leaf-through book called The Hysterical Herstory of Hysteria and How It Was Cured from Ancient Times Until Now. Not surprisingly, the herstory has vibrators in it going as far back as 100 years or more. Well, I've had the delight of being friends with the Gigi's for years. To preserve their security and privacy while performing guerrilla theater protests against museums and the art world and now Hollywood, for 30 years they have worn gorilla masks in public during their protests and appearances, and they've adopted the names of women artists when demonstrating, women artists who've gone before. I've been special friends with the founders, Frida Kahlo and Keta Kolvitz, and although I do know their real names, I'm not about to share here. However, Frida recently sent me a copy of the hilarious Hysterical book, which, along with the latest Gorilla Girls postcard, you can find at gorillagirls.com. Oh, and gorilla is spelled like a militant revolutionary, not like a primate. This new card is perfect for our Surrealism Corner, so I'm going to share it with you, courtesy of the Gorilla Girls. President Trump announces new commemorative months, and then in 2 columns. February was African American History Month, now Ku Klux Klan Month. March was Women's History Month, now Locker Room Talk Month. April was Immigration Awareness Month, now Extreme Vetting Month. May was Asian American Heritage Month, now Internment Camp Heritage Month. June was LGBTQ Pride Month, now Pray the Gay Away Month. September was Latino Heritage Month, now Mass Deportation Month. October was Disability Awareness Month, now Supermodel Month. And November was American Indian Heritage Month, now White People's Month. I just could not resist sharing something so exquisitely surreal. We have to take another brief pause here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and when we come back, I'll be speaking with a distinguished American poet, and one of her themes is, in fact, immigration and what America really means. Couldn't be more timely. And then we're going to stop talking about poetry, and she's going to read us some yummy. So we'll be right back.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we're back again with, to my great pleasure, Alicia Ostriker returning to the program. Alicia is a distinguished American poet and critic. She has published 15 volumes of poetry, including The Old Woman, the Tulip, and the Dog. That was in 2014. No Heaven, the Volcano Sequence, and The Imaginary Lover, which was a winner of the William Carlos Williams Award. She was twice a National Book Award finalist. Her critical work now involves the now classic book Stealing the Language, The Emergence of Women's Poetry in America, and her 1980 feminist classic and anti-war poem Sequence, The Mother/Child Papers, was recently reprinted by the University of Pittsburgh Press. Her collection, The Book of 70, received the 2009 National Jewish Book Award for Poetry. She has been a Chancellor of the Academy of American Poets. She's Professor Emerita of English at Rutgers, and she teaches in the Low Residency Poetry MFA program of Drew University. She is a voice of intelligence and passion about women's place in literature and about the themes of family and social justice and Jewish and immigrant identity and personal growth. And it's my delight to welcome back Alicia Ostriker. Alicia, welcome back to the program. It's good to have you back.
Good to be back, Robin.
You're coming out now with a new book, Hallelujah, which is quite wonderful, called Waiting for the Light. It's
Waiting for the Light.
Yep.
Yes, and I hope it has more than one meaning.
I particularly wanted to get your voice on the program this year because you are a poet of migration and immigration. You are a poet in whose singing the voices of all the people who have come to this country from all over the planet for generations can be heard, and so movingly, and the dispossessed and the silenced. And these days, politically, those, of course, are the people who are really getting it in the teeth, even more than usual.
I began writing the poems in Waiting for the Light when we purchased an apartment in the city, in the Upper West Side. My husband and I both grew up in New York, both left when we were 18 to go to college, and lived in Princeton, New Jersey for about half a century. But you can take the girl out of the city, but you can't take the city out of the girl. So we have come round to our roots. And the thing about it is, I realized as I started walking around my neighborhood, around 97th and West End, I realized that there was a whole wave of immigrants that in some ways were like the wave my grandparents came over on and were different, but that story is the story of the city.
Yep.
And that I realized, although Spanish is not my language, I wish I spoke it. Everyone in this neighborhood on Broadway speaks Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has come here to make a better life.
Mm-hmm.
That's how my grandparents came. And the city, as I say in the poem The Light, the city belongs to its waves of immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
The country belongs to its waves of immigrants.
Exactly.
And as I began writing about what I saw in my neighborhood, I got it. I got the connection between my Jewish grandparents and the people who have come here now, and their grandparents and their children, and the hope of something better.
Yes, well, it comes through in these remarkable poems. I would love to hear the poem Ghazal, America, because Ghazal, as I recall, is originally, isn't it a Turkish poetry form?
It's originally a Persian form.
Aha, Persian.
It's a Persian form and then an Arab form.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it works is it's in couplets in which the end word of the first couplet is the same, the two lines of the couplet, and then every other couplet, the second line ends in the same word.
Right.
In Arab poetry, it's like what the sonnet is for us. It's kind of the standard, most familiar form of poetry in a whole huge part of the world. My grandfather's pipe tobacco fragrance, moss green cardigan, his Yiddish lullaby when I woke crying, 3 of my earliest memories in America. Arriving on time for the first big war, remaining for the second, sad grandpa who walked across Europe to get to America. When the babies starved, when the village burned, when you were flogged, log out, ship out, there was a dream, the green breast of America. My grandfather said no president, including Roosevelt, would save the Jews in Europe. He drew out an ample handkerchief and wiped away the weeping of America. One thing that makes me happy about my country is that Allen Ginsberg could fearlessly write the comic poem America. Route 66 entices me westward toward dreaming California. I adore superhighways, but money is the root of all evil in America. Let miners curse mines, let workers curse bosses, let football curse management. Let me curse the makers of bombs over Baghdad here in America. When I video your rivers, your painterly meadows, your public sculpture Rockies, when I walk in your crooked cities, I love you so much. I bless you so much, America. People, look there. Grandpa, please look. Liberty, the Shekinah herself, welcoming you like a queen, like a goddess to America. Take the flute player from his mesa. Take the raven from his tree. Now that the buffalo is gone from America, white man, the blacks are snarling, the yellows swarming, the umber terrorists are tunneling through and breathing your air of fear in America. If you will it, it is no dream. Somebody admonished my grandfather. He surmised they meant survival in America.
Oh, Alicia.
You have to say about this form, the hustle, that the couplets are never narrative. They're never connected as a story. They're always like a stream of consciousness, more or less around the same subject, and in this case, the subject is America.
Yes, but it's a very musical form because of the repetition, the refrains, and also what listeners can't see unless they get the book, and they should run out and get the book. What they can't see is the page and the puns that are going on the page, so that when money is the root of all evil is spelled ROUTE in the trip to westward to California. And there are various other word plays. How about another one, please? What about America the Beautiful?
Okay. Do you remember our earnestness, our sincerity in first grade when we learned to sing America the Beautiful along with the Star-Spangled Banner and say the Pledge of Allegiance to America? We put our hands over our first grade hearts. We felt proud to be citizens of America. I said, one nation invisible until corrected. Maybe I was right about America. School days, dear old golden rule days, when we learned how to behave in America, what to wear, how to smoke, how to despise our parents who didn't understand us or America. Only later learning the banner and the beautiful live on opposite sides of the street in America. Only later discovering the nation is divisible by money, by power, by color, by gender, by sex. America. We comprehend it now. This land is two lands, one triumphant bully, one still hopeful America. Imagining amber waves of grain blowing in the wind, purple mountains, and no homeless in America. Sometimes I still put my hand tenderly on my heart, somehow or other still carried away by America.
Oh, what a lovely and heartbreaking poem. Talk for a minute, Alicia, about the role of poetry in times like this, because, I hear sometimes in despair from other poets of, how useless they feel. I still feel there is a huge and central and absolutely invaluable need, even more at such times of crisis, when the soul of the very nation is up for destruction.
More.
Do you feel the same?
I think whenever we are at a turning moment, a moment of crisis, people want poetry, crave poetry, need poetry. Mm-hmm. Everyone was exchanging poems at the time of 9/11. People have poetry at birthdays and funerals and weddings.
Yep.
To mark a moment of crisis or change, poetry is important. The Statue of Liberty changed its meaning when Emma Lazarus wrote that poem, where the statue says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free.
Right.
I lift my lamp beside the golden door." And in the poem, she calls that statue Mother of Exiles.
Yes.
Which is not what was meant by it when the French gave it to us.
I know, but most people don't know. You're right.
Most people don't know that. It was supposed to mean friendship between France and America because we were both republics. We had both overthrown our monarchies. Mm-hmm. It was a symbol of liberty enlightening the world. But when Lazarus wrote that poem, the meaning changed.
And thereby
changed the meaning of the of the harbor of New York City.
That's right.
Changed the meaning of America.
Exactly.
Changed the meaning
That's
of
right.
America. And when people say poetry makes nothing happen, that is one poem that absolutely and forever refutes that statement.
Yes.
Poetry can make things happen.
Precisely. This wonderful book is called Waiting for the Light, and Alicia Ostriker has brought us light, as she is wont to do. And I thank you, I congratulate you on this, whatever it is, 15th or 16th book of poems, beautiful as always, strong as always, and thank you for being with us today, Alicia.
Thank you so much, Robin. It is always a pleasure to talk to you.
Time for one last break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I'll return directly with some fighting words.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back to some fighting words. I want to begin by reminding us all that Monday, May 1st is Rise Up Day, with nationwide activities in which hundreds of thousands of Americans are planning to rise up for immigrant and refugee families in at least 100 cities across the country. One site to go to for specifics in your area is indivisibleguide.com. It's all the more crucial because the real vision and action remains with us at the grassroots, not with the top-down folks, certainly not those from the right, and outrageously not those from the left either. Yes, I'm referring to the so-called Unity Tour with the Mutt and Jeff duo of Democratic National Committee Chair Tom Perez and Senator Bernie Sanders, two straight guys telling all the rest of us to shut up because only the issues they pronounce important are important. It's classic, the depressing recurrence of assaults against feminist, truly progressive priorities from boys on the left as well as the right, especially when extremes of left and right go so far they curve around in a circle to meet each other and blend, bonding over anti-globalization and the supposed triviality of sexism and racism. We see it playing out in France right now. After the first-round elections left centrist pro-European Union candidate Emmanuel Macron and extreme right Marine Le Pen standing, all the centrist and left-of-center parties united to throw their support behind Macron to stop fascism from returning to their country. All, that is, with the exception of Luc Mélenchon, leader of his own ultra-left movement. You know, two of the reasons we got Trump are named Sanders and Jill Stein. Look, by now we know Bernie's one-note message, the millionaire and billionaire class, economics, economics, economics. Perez, who comes across as ineffectual and deadly dull next to the irascible old uncle shouting at his side, Perez basically went along for the ride, trying to agree in order to get his paws on that massive mailing list that Sanders, unlike Hillary, refuses to share with the DNC. Perez then backed and forthed about abortion, trying to clean up the debris Sanders left behind in his own refusal to endorse Jon Ossoff, the pro-choice candidate who amazingly almost won the first-round election in Georgia. Yet Sanders was supportive of a guy running for mayor of Omaha, Nebraska, whose record is openly anti-choice. Sanders called him a progressive. Sure, Sanders himself has a good record on reproductive rights, but he still doesn't get it. He doesn't get the connections between economics and everything that he dismisses as secondary social issues. Social issues is like homophobes trivializing same-sex love as a lifestyle choice. In an excellent New York Magazine piece, Rebecca Traister reminds us that in 2015, Sanders spoke carelessly about a populist strategy that exchanges core democratic beliefs for the set of issues most important to him. Once you get off the social issues, he says, abortion, gay rights, guns, and into the economic issues, there's a lot more agreement than the pundits understand. Also, Sanders doesn't grasp, he never has, and I doubt he ever will, that control of one's own reproductive life is central to the social, professional, and the economic realities of women, nor does he listen when told that the women most likely to need abortion services and most negatively affected by restricted access are poor and low-income women, and disproportionately women of color. Women who are unsuccessful in obtaining the procedure are 3 times as likely to fall into poverty over the following 2 years as women who are able to abort, despite beginning in comparable financial situations. They're also more likely to wind up unemployed. Contrarily, women who can get the terminations they need are statistically much more likely to follow through on employment or education plans. Look, this country offers precious little or no paid leave, no child care help, other supports that are common throughout the developed world, and all that's not an economic issue? The Democrats have made this mistake over and over, jettisoning what they consider women's issues and downplaying racial issues while scrambling after white male votes that are defecting from them anyway. When Sanders says of abortion, quote, "You can't just exclude people who disagree with us on one issue," close quote, we know damned well he would not dare say that if the issue were labor protections, climate change, health care, immigration reform, or corporate power. And when Perez agrees, but then, under pressure from women, flip-flops, he's not inspiring confidence either. Worse, when they claim that compromising on abortion is central to their pragmatic political path forward, they sound really dumb. So I guess we have to forcefully remind them of 2 conveniently forgotten facts. First, polls show that 7 in 10 voters, including independents, and guess what, even in Kansas, support safe and accessible abortion and are willing to vote based on that support. A post-election Pew study reported support for Roe v. Wade at an all-time high of 69%. Second, all the grassroots activism, the marches, town halls, email and phone and boycott campaigns that are sustaining and, yes, building energy and clout and demonstrably are working, all those are being conceived, led, staffed, and activated by women who literally are the organized resistance, this time supported by principled men. Traister cites a recent poll showing that 86% of daily calls to Senate and House offices are from women, and a record number of women are training and filing to run for office. Now, if the Democratic Party wants to ignore this dynamic, energized base, we'll take our power elsewhere, even if we have to form a new party, the Indivisible Party. I truly hope that's not necessary. It's obvious that Bernie continues his rant because economics is the one oppression he experienced growing up poor. But show a little imagination. Many analyses of the election also still claim that economic issues were the only or primary explanation for Trump's success, in the face of more and more research emerging proving otherwise. Just now, another recent paper from researchers at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, found that sexism and racism predicted support for Trump better than economic dissatisfaction, something feminists and this program have been saying for months. It's not brain science, guys. The point is, economics are the means, the metaphor, through which deeper issues of sex, race, class, ethnicity, and tribalism, nationalism, nativism, whatever you want to call it, get expressed. Economics are the verbs, but those other compartments into which humanity stuffs itself, those are the nouns. And those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag #FightingWords. And remember to rise up on May 1st. And that's it for today. This program is syndicated, but if you can't find the broadcast on a radio station in your area, you can always visit us at WMClive.com for the show, plus the archive of all our previous episodes, and at iTunes Worldwide, where you can stream, download, and subscribe to our show's podcast. Also, be sure to find WMC Live on Facebook and Twitter. And you can check out my own website and blog at robinmorgan.net and find me on Facebook and Twitter, too. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Opinions expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. WMC President and Executive Producer of this program, Julie Burton, and our founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us, and don't forget to join us next week right here on Women's Media Center Live.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, tune your radio to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on WMCLive.com. Talk radio with a brain.